Good morning, folks. Good morning, good afternoon.
I'm still in morning mode as well. Afternoon.
We're just going to give it a few minutes for everyone else to join us. So make yourselves at home, grab a cuppa.
I am prepared. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I didn't realise it was a visual thing. I'm like, no.
It doesn't have to be. You can.
Well, not be.
Oh, great! I'm going to go off video then.
Yeah.
Oh,
not you, Brian.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, you have to stay, Brian.
Sort my hair out.
Well, everyone's good. Need to multitask and keep an eye on. Good. I like about Zoom that it's kind of everyone is bang on schedules usually.
Yeah, pretty good.
Hello, Mr. Lovenbury.
Hi, Lindsay.
Hello.
Lindsay's.
Lindsay.
Thank you. Hello.
We like to make it easy.
Yeah, what's the plural of Lindsay?
It tends to be or Liz.
Wing buddies.
Partners in crime. Nice little split so far in terms of gender, actually.
It sounds like that's your house doorbell. Is that what the sound Zoom makes?
Yeah.
Really fun.
We'll do it another few minutes, folks, to see if anyone else wants to join us. Should really be playing some hold music for you all.
We're not going to sing for you, don't worry.
Please do, please. You know, when you've just had one of those weeks, this week has been procurement, and it's not my forte, and it doesn't make me happy. So I've just had little nuggets of like little networking sessions and little like information gathering bits. But so a little bit of singing would really elevate my mood, I think.
Sophie, I'll send you a voice note privately and not ruin everybody else's day.
I don't know. Maybe a song with men in there, like "It's Raining Men" or.
I mean, that should be the anthem, shouldn't it? Really.
Think of a few good ones.
I know I was at a networking session. It was last week or the week before. And there was so many people that everybody kind of just blended into one. And it got to the point where I was like, oh, how am I going to make myself stand out? So I came on and I was like, good morning, it's Friday, yay. And everybody was just like, right, yeah. And
I like it. It's an impression.
That's great. You got to stand out.
You do. I mean, not necessarily for the good things, but yeah.
Have you seen the Matilda musical? There's a great song in there called "Loud" about don't worry about what you say, just say it loudly and with passion. So yeah, great musical if you haven't.
That's very fun.
Instead of my motto for life, it'll be my song for life. Yeah, be loud.
Go for it.
Thank you.
Love. I'll give it one more, just in case, and then we'll just dive in and get cracking. We're going to do a bit of scene setting to begin with anyway, before we start our interrogation process. So people won't miss too much. Cool. Awesome. Well, I'm just going to get cracking then, folks, if that's all right. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and happy International Men's Day to all the men on the call. So we're going to obviously celebrate International Men's Day with a bit of a virtual, I suppose, fireside chat with Brian. Before we get started, I'll go through some housekeeping rules, which I'm sure we're all far too familiar with now in the world of Zoom. Just for reference, we're going to record the session today so we can play it back. If you don't wish to be in the recording, by all means, just turn off your videos. Don't feel the need to have them on, but it's always nice to have some faces to stare back at and to interact with. As we go through today's session, we'll be asking Brian a number of questions. We'd obviously love for you all to be involved. So please make use of the chat function and feel free to get involved with your thoughts or any questions that you'd like to ask Brian yourselves. Before we begin, I thought it might just be useful to tell you briefly who we are and what we do. And then I'll ask Brian to introduce himself before handing over to Lindsay to really set the context, I suppose, for today. So with 50/50, we are a diversity and inclusion training consultancy business. So we have a particular specialism in gender balance, and we help organisations really create their diversity and inclusion strategies. And we also would go in and deliver bespoke training to really match their needs. Now, when we say 50/50, for us, it is definitely not about 50/50 bums on seats. It's more about that equality of opportunity for everybody. Something else to address is that we are very aware that we are two white female founders working in the diversity and inclusion space. We definitely do not profess to know or understand all of the different challenges faced by people. Diversity and inclusion is a really hefty topic, as we all know, and it requires continuous learning, and society is always changing. What we always do hope to do or to achieve is to just share our experiences and knowledge and really focus on the inclusion piece. And with that in mind, hopefully all of our teachings and learnings are transferable across that diversity spectrum and really taking into account intersectionality and all of those multifaceted layers that make us all unique and individual. So that's a bit about us. Now, Brian, we've known for a number of years. We're very proud really to have him as one of our 50 ambassadors. Brian, if I can just pass over to you briefly to just introduce yourself before we go to Linz.
Yeah, thanks very much for inviting me to be part of this event today. So I'm Brian Ballantyne. I'm a co-founder of Men for Inclusion, a new group we've got on LinkedIn. I'm an author of a book called Confessions of a Working Father, which I think is probably how we met a couple of years ago around that time. And in my spare time, I work for Amazon over in Luxembourg. I'm a regional manager delivering our worldwide engineering training. So yeah, great to be here.
Super, thank you so much. And then Lindsay Britton, other Lindsay, if I can ask you to just kind of set the scene, I suppose, for today's session for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know whether this is just our experience, and please feel free to, say otherwise if your experience is different than this, but obviously International Men's Day is really important, but we've been celebrating International Women's Day for what feels like a really long time. So even before we had 50/50, we're celebrating International Women's Day every year for what feels like loads of years. And I know a lot of organisations, it's very much on their radar, and for individuals as well. However, it just feels like it's been so much more recent that there's been, any kind of awareness around International Men's Day. And although, yes, of course, we want to celebrate men, it really is about addressing some of the issues and challenges and barriers that have been created. And I think it really is about raising that awareness and making sure that we are talking about those issues. From what we know, and again, this could be a lot broader than what just we know, but in our experience, the issues and challenges that we know of seem to stem from the same core stereotypes and biases that can be really harmful and have a negative impact. So it's really these societal views that affect all of us, not just boys and men, but all of us from a really young age. And it can create a really vicious circle that ultimately impedes our view of how we see ourselves, about our true potential and different opportunities and life choices that are available to us. And that can also crucially feed into mental health as well. So I just wanted to run through this cycle with you. So before I run through it to really set the context of the harmful effects of stereotypes, I wanted to say, and obviously we know with science that there's different schools of thought out there. When scientific research is done, there's always contradictory research as well. But the research that I'm referring to is that men and women biologically do not have different brains where men are a certain way and women are a certain way. Men are better at certain things and women are better at certain things. This is all societal, it's not biological. So we have, as a society, have decided between ourselves that pink is for girls, blue is for boys. So we've got there right at the top, pink and blue products are created. And then from that, we can see that then we get to marketing that gets more and more gendered. So you may or may not have noticed that when you go toy shopping or you go into clothes shops, especially for younger children, you've got your pink aisle, your blue aisle, your boys' toys, your girls' toys. And especially with the barrage of media that we have now, there's a lot more marketing that's gendered, and sometimes it passes us by because we're so used to it. This then develops a norm for boys and girls, and especially from a really young age. And then when they go through school, that's when it starts developing into that girls are better at this, boys are better at this. And then when you get into your teenage years, we've got those social pressures to follow that norm, and that norm increases. And then as life goes on, fewer people break gender norms, and it continues to reinforce the idea that boys and girls like different things. So there is our vicious cycle. And in boys and men specifically, reinforcing these stereotypes and traditional views of these gendered roles can then lead to toxic masculinity, and as we've mentioned, contributing to mental health issues. And then that in turn also hinders progression of women's equality as well. So I just wanted to give you a bit of an idea of the situation and what we're dealing with when we're talking about some of the issues that men are facing at the moment, to put things into a little bit more context and highlight why it is so important to have these discussions and have a day dedicated to do that so we don't forget, and why we need to start challenging these gender stereotypes. So male body image dissatisfaction has tripled in the last 25 years from 15% of the population to 45%. That's an incredible jump. So this is clearly a huge, huge issue that needs addressing. 25 years isn't actually that long a period of time for that much of a jump. 45% of boys in the UK's primary and secondary schools experience homophobic bullying for acting like a girl. Now, that is significantly higher than when girls act like boys. So there's a definite real issue that's experienced more around femininity with boys and men. Then obviously when we think about men and the fear of being emasculated, that's all around just moving more towards the feminine, and again leads to that toxic masculinity. So again, another real issue that needs addressing from a really young age. Now, the construction trade has the highest number of suicides of any profession, with the risk of suicide being a whopping 1.6 times higher than the national average, which we already know is pretty big for men compared to women anyway. Now, obviously, there's going to be other factors that contribute to that, but it seems as though one of the contributing factors would be that tough guy image in the construction trade, and maybe the fear of speaking about mental health, depression or anxiety, for fear of being ridiculed or excluded, and not talking about your feelings or any issues that come up, because it doesn't perpetuate that tough guy exterior, which is really sad. And I think that speaks volumes that the construction trade particularly is facing such a large number, especially around mental health. So when we are talking about suicides with that, just to put that into context for you as well. So there was 1,419 people working in skilled construction building trades who took their own lives from 2011 to 2015. And 1,409 of those were men and just 10 were women. So it really is serious. And I think you can see that these kind of stereotypes feed into all kinds of problems later down the line. And finally, shared parental leave was introduced in April 2015 in the UK, and only 2% of new parents split their entitlement, which is a tiny, tiny number. I do realise that there's going to be a lot of other contributing factors to that, especially financial, because our offer, in all fairness, isn't particularly encouraging or appealing. But I am quite sure that some of the factors involved in that will probably be around the culture in the workplace and societal views as well. So just a few things to bear in mind before we start our chat with Brian today, because I'm sure a lot of the same topics are going to be threaded throughout. So I'm going to hand you over to Linz, who I think has got the first question for Brian.
Thank you so much. Folks, I'm sure you might be aware already, but if you want to pin the videos of Lindsay, Brian and myself to the top as we go through, then feel free to do so. If you don't want to look at our faces, I totally understand too. So Brian, if we think back to some of the stats there that Lindsay was going through in terms of toxic masculinity, I think sometimes that it's a topic that's kind of a one-gendered debate, and a lot of women would share their experiences with it, but we don't really often hear from a man. Do you have any examples or experiences of how detrimental it can be, or any personal insights onto it?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it was interesting to see those stats. I wasn't familiar with the construction trade specifically. I know that within men the suicide rate is higher. And it's an interesting point as well that we've been celebrating International Women's Day for, I think, obviously over 100 years now. And I've been involved for the last 10 years. This is the first year I've been involved in International Men's Day. And, I think I've been a bit embarrassed to kind of put my name to it in recent years. There's so much talk about male privilege and, men have got everything. And I think we have got a lot of advantages, particularly white straight men. It doesn't mean that it's always easy for us. So this year I'm kind of proudly celebrating International Men's Day. My company's not doing anything for it, and I don't know whether they will in the future. I had to launch International Women's Day at Amazon 5 years ago. Maybe I'll do the same for International Men's Day. I think, as you say, in terms of toxic masculinity, this term is used a lot about, the actions of men towards women, the actions of men towards other men, or, even women towards men as well. Yeah, I think it's, pretty damaging. I was at an all-boys school from 11 to 18, so I definitely saw the impact of, a majority, an all-male environment can have on, men like me who may be more sensitive or want to talk about things or have had traumas they want to kind of talk through. So yeah, I can definitely understand, in a place like the construction place where you don't want to you don't want to show any weakness, you don't want to talk about things, you don't want to be seen as, not a strong man, and definitely you don't want to have any banter thrown at you. Yeah, it's how do we shift that? I mean, even in a corporate environment, it's difficult to talk about these things. So I imagine in the construction industry, it's even harder.
I think you make a good point there with regards to male privilege, and I think there's a misconception that male privilege suggests that men have it easy and that they have all of these opportunities open to them, and some of that might be strictly true. There might be some truth behind it. But for me, male privilege doesn't mean that men have had an easy time of it. It doesn't take anything away from the fact that there's still barriers and challenges to individuals behind the scenes. It's just that privilege is beneficial in certain areas. That's my food for thought.
Yeah, and I guess this is why I wrote a book a couple of years ago. I never set out to write a book. I just started sharing stories on LinkedIn about being I called it a working father, just to kind of play with the stereotype. And, one of the reasons I did that was because a lot of the research shows that, the way you can help women to get ahead isn't by making them go to, lean in talks and get mentoring by men and everything else. It's about, the research shows it's where men are helping more with the kids or with, caregiving duties. And so that's something that I do. It's something that my dad did. My granddad did as well. Even, my grandfather working in the construction industry in Gateshead a few years ago. That's something I wanted to kind of showcase and really just, showing some of the challenges that it is about being a kind of, a man, about being a father. These days when, your company, there's so much expectation that you're not going to do that you are going to be dedicated to your job, and you're not going to care about your kids. You're not going to be caring about your home life. And yeah, like like James, I was at a grammar school as well. And, that's kind of how I got into the inclusion space. I was 15 years old on the rugby team, and there was a letter sent home, to all the parents. And it said, maybe the mums and sisters and girlfriends would like to help make tea for the lads and the dads on the Saturday. Many mums and sisters did do that, but my stepmom said no way. And I had to kind of take these letters back and forth from her to the rugby coach saying that's not acceptable. What lesson are we giving to these 15-year-old boys, in grammar school, going in the working world about what the role of women is to make them coffee? And you see that in meetings, like the most senior woman in the room, person in the room is a woman, and she's been asked to make coffee and take notes, or there's been jokes made about her. So yeah, 25 years later, there's still work to do. And I think, men have got a role in that. So I'm happy to be part of the conversation.
I think it's really interesting that you said, instead of lean-in circles and mentoring, it really is about, sharing the load a bit to give women more opportunity to progress and have been able to participate in the labour market. It's alleviating that and making room for them to be able to do that. How is it working for your family, and has there been any backlash or anything about, the way that you do things in terms of it being non-traditional?
Yeah, that's a great question. And on that point, I think, these groups can be beneficial, but I think there's so much of a mindset around, looking at men at the top of companies, like we need to fix women, we need to make women more confident, we need to give women the kind of skills that men have got. But that's not necessarily what you need to do. You need to look at the culture and look at what you do, not just for the benefit of women. And a lot of people say to me, it's great that you're an ally. I've turned down teams that have been all male, but that's not necessarily to help women. But, for me personally, I don't want to work in that kind of environment. I want to be able to kind of, talk things through and not be in that kind of all male environment. In the family I grew up in, my mum experienced manic depression. She committed suicide when I was 6 on Christmas Eve. So, mental health is something that's important to me. It's very stigmatized. I mean, in those days, it wasn't something you talked about. Even though you tell friends at school and they just tease you about it. You didn't have any support from my parents, didn't have any support for us as children. I mean, nowadays there's a lot more support, and for my book sales, I give all the proceeds to Winston's Wish, which is a charity for bereaved children. But I think this is really important. For everyone, for women and men, non-binary people, I think it's important to talk about mental health, and especially we've seen this now this year in the corona crisis. Everyone's experiencing it, and luckily I've put a lot of work into that over many years about how to manage kind of mental health, which has really benefited me at this time. So I guess the thing about losing a parent and my dad remarrying was that our family became more blended. Not everyone had the same skin color, not everyone was able-bodied, not everyone was heterosexual, and that really informed my growing up. To see particularly my stepmother as a great role model for me, not only with the school but also my youngest brother has cerebral palsy, fighting the government on disability benefits and things like that. So yeah, just growing up in that kind of environment. And even now in a family where, my 13-year-old's transgender, and, it's great. Everyone in the corporate environment's like, great, use the right pronouns. And I know we're so inclusive. And it's pretty difficult when you're trying to figure out, navigate all the bullying that's happening in the school and, figuring it all out. So, but I think this is modern life. I mean, I think every family's got something, right? And everyone's had different experiences. Everyone probably knows someone who's experienced depression or perhaps even committed suicide. So yeah, it doesn't feel, and the more I talk about it, the more people say, yeah, that's similar for me as well. So I guess I'm just trying to hold space and role model that it's okay to talk about these things. I've waffled a lot there. I'll let you chip in.
No, it's great, and it's really interesting because you do have a really interesting background that has obviously led you to where you are today and being able to advocate in this way as well and understand a lot of the issues. And I think a lot of that has made you who you are in terms of not shying away from being soft or having that softer side, and still, being able to advocate for men in that way as well. Because so I know that was a conversation that you were having recently around the image of men and how having that softer side was always frowned upon, really. Are you seeing any kind of change with that? Or because I know quite a lot of people commented on one of the posts that you have put on, and I had put a comment on it as well. But a lot of men were commenting saying, oh yeah, well, my dad, you know, was would never talk about his feelings, you know, it was all that man up and stiff up a lip, and I didn't feel as though I was able to talk about things. And it goes from generation to generation, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And there is this thing about, you know, being a hard man and not being soft, not showing weakness, and yeah, don't be soft, as if it's I don't think it is a weakness. I think it's a strength. And if you act like water rather than ice, you can get around things easier. You can be compassionate. You can support people. Have I had it for my own dad? I know my dad, like when he grew up in Newcastle, and he was playing hockey one day, and his dad, kind of, who was he was also a lorry driver, kind of with his mate there, started making jokes about him and calling him a Jesse and everything, and probably just, you know, in front of his mates. When men are on their own, they're usually a bit nicer than when they're in front of other men, because they don't want to be the one who's picked on. So I think that still happens. I think Lindsay, you were saying even for your new baby, someone was saying don't let them get soft. Is that right?
Oh, it was me with me with the father-in-law.
Oh right, okay.
Because I had put him on a soft blanket, and he was like, "Oh, you don't want to let him get too soft. You'll never play football or rugby if he's soft." And I was like, "Well, your son's soft, and that's one of the reasons why I've married him, and he's my husband. So he'll probably be all right. He'll be fine."
Exactly. Sorry, I got my Lindsay's in a mix there.
No, you're right. Feeds into the stereotypes, because I know that it goes back to the vicious circle of toys, doesn't it? I'm fortunate to have the first grandson on my side, so with my little boy, they're thrilled to have him in the family, but it's very much Ireland rugby tops and footballs. And whenever I asked for, Mum got into crafting in Corona, it's keeping her sane and it's fantastic, but I asked her to make a felt doll for my little boy Jude.
Mm-hmm.
Like, no, he doesn't need a doll, he's a boy. And I'm like,
yeah, I know what you mean. I'm in Luxembourg, and you go in, you know, in the toy shops. It's not just pink and blue, but half the shop will be the boys' stuff. That's so the Lego, the construction, and the other half will be pink, and it'll be like literally toy ironing boards and cooking equipment and cleaning, and it's, you know, incredibly stereotyped. I work at Amazon, and over the years, we're kind of putting pressure on them to think about, you know, classifying toys by genre rather than gender. There's some great initiatives in the UK. I know. Let toys be toys, for example, just looking at that. And I think, you know, and then you look at how people are portrayed in advertising, you know, and then it follows through. And you can see even over history, and like until the mid 80s, women were pretty advanced in, you know, software engineering. Then with all the kind of the new Apple computers, all the advertising, you look back at it now, it's all boys and girls being ridiculed, and, you know, boys got the computer in the bedroom, girls didn't get it. Then that's when women started dropping out of computing. So yeah, there's a lot of things. And, you know, my eldest, when they were young, they wanted princess dresses and dolls, and, you know, as long as they're happy, I don't really care, and I've always kind of supported that. But yeah, you have other parents saying, "Oh, I wouldn't do that if I were you," and like, "Oh, what?" So I think there is a lot of paranoia. Maybe it's fear, you know, acting like a girl, this kind of thing. And I think there's a comment in the chat about, you know, there's a tomboy, but what's the opposite, and kind of being effeminate is kind of a criticism. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack.
When we last spoke, so when I initially approached you about this event, you made a comment, or you told me about being approached on LinkedIn by women. And I was retelling the story to Lindsay, because this is something that I would hear quite often from female friends or colleagues or people in my network, but I've never heard of it happening from a man's perspective. So referring to women approaching you inappropriately on LinkedIn, would that be fair?
Yeah, I guess inappropriate. I've got to be careful. My wife's in the kitchen. I don't know if she knows the story or not. But yeah, a couple of times about a month ago, and maybe about a year before that, I had, you know, I've got a lot of connections on LinkedIn, and generally people will contact me for, like, you know, job referrals or, you know, advice or whatever. But yeah, I got an email from someone saying, "Hey, I hope you're single. I really like your smile. Maybe we can get together." And you know, and it's like, oh, okay. And kind of, you know, check the email, and it was the actual person, and, you know, had a look on LinkedIn, and yeah, it's flattering. But I said, well, I'm glad you like the photo. My wife took it. We've been married 15 years. If you saw my blog post, you'd know that. But, you know, thanks, all the best and everything. And yeah, and then someone else contacted me with a few photos. And I was like, but, you know, it's kind of, it happens so rarely, and maybe it's, you know, for a guy in his 40s, maybe it's a bit flattering. But I've got friends, particularly women, who'll get a lot, and they'll get really obscene photos sent to them, and they'll get their ideas dismissed because men see them as a visual object for their own pleasure, and there's been a lot of harassment. So for me, it was an interesting experience, but I think for a lot of women it's just a hassle, and a lot of women don't put their photo on LinkedIn for that reason. So what did you think about that experience?
I think it's really interesting that it happens to men, and again, it's something that I'd never really thought about, because you don't know what you don't know, and I've never seen it from that side before. But when you talk to me about it, it just brings up that battle of, well, it wouldn't be appropriate if a man commented on a woman's appearance, or it's a professional network, and it's just, you don't do that. It's somebody based on their merit and their skills that you should hopefully connect with them, not because they're really attractive in their pictures.
Mm-hmm.
So it was interesting to have that flipped on its head for me, and it's equally not appropriate either for women to do that to men. But it's just that whole debate of, would it be taken the same way when gender roles are reversed, or is it acceptable because it's flattering for a man to receive that attention from women? I just think it's an interesting dynamic to consider.
I have to say as well, I thought it was really interesting that you replied a really nice reply to them, because normally, like, if it happens to us, it's just like a roll of the eyes, like, oh, for God's sake, kind of thing. And then you're, replying back, being really nice to them, saying, oh, well, I am married. And I think there's a really different reaction there, which is interesting in itself as well.
Yeah, I guess if it happened all the time, I'd probably ignore it. I think it was just a surprise, and I don't know, I guess it felt awkward, really. It was like, well, this is a professional networking site, this isn't Tinder. I'm never been on that, but yeah, it just kind of felt awkward. I guess, the people I do ignore are kind of all the Bitcoin traders and everyone else who trying to hassle you on LinkedIn. But I guess I'll give another example. In previous role, I was working in diversity and inclusion at Amazon, and about a year ago, I applied for a diversity role at another company, a big Italian company based here in Luxembourg. They replied to me in writing saying, thanks for your application, but we're looking for a woman for this role. And, maybe they were, and maybe that's who they had in mind. But if that had been the other way around, and someone had put in, writing, we're looking for a man for this role, for an executive position, that's probably going to be a legal case. And, people said, well, you could sue them. And I kind of thought, well, it's a good experience for me. Sophie says it's positive discrimination. And I see that, and I think, there's plenty of, as a straight white man in my 40s with good career experience, so there's a lot of opportunities available to me, and I don't need to fight for all these roles, especially if, the roles that other people want to go for. It just felt kind of unfair, and it's the other side of the coin, isn't it? It's like, around the whole Black Lives Matter debate, a lot of black women, and I've got a lot of black women friends in the US, pointing out that in companies, the black woman's role as a diversity officer, it's like, great, we've got a black woman on the board, put her in diversity, and then it's the other way around. And I think what's going to push more is when you've got more diversity in, the head of finance or the head of operations, isn't always, a white man. So yeah, I think, you see the other side of the coin, and I think it's probably just as damaging when people have biases saying, well, men can't do diversity work, they're kind of also saying women can't do other kinds of work as well. So yeah, that was another example.
It's an interesting one about positive discrimination, because obviously, firstly, it's illegal. It's not away from a 50-50 stance anyway that Lindsay and I would support or promote. It should be about positive selection for us, and doing everything behind the scenes in a more holistic way to make sure that we have a society and workplaces that are more inclusive and more open for those opportunities of lots of different individuals to get involved and to take part. So I think it should be based on merit, and definitely not ticking boxes to get bums on seats, because that's when the issues start to come out, and that's where you don't get any of the meaningful positive change that we would all hope for in that battle for better balance, if we put it.
Yeah, I totally agree.
I think that's always a good one to get out there, because I think some people do get quite confused around that as well. If they see that you're doing something about it, then they kind of think, oh well, then we're doing the right thing. But there's definitely a right way and a wrong way, and in a lawful way and in a legal way. So just make sure you're on the right side of the tracks with that one.
Yeah, I guess the whole quota conversation could spin off into something different. So yeah, I'll let you carry on with it. It's a great side topic.
And I know I've spoken quite a lot about stereotypes, which obviously factor into so many things throughout our lives and determine many things, from like careers to how we are with our personality traits and around other people. But one of the things that I'd like to speak to you about, Brian, is around stereotype threat. Now, that might be a phrase that some people are aware of and some people might not be. So I just want to explain a little bit about what that is before we ask you about it. But it's where people feel at risk of conforming to a particular stereotype about their social group. So understanding what the stereotype is, you're trying so hard, you're so conscious of that it impairs your performance, or it impairs how you see yourself in that situation, and it can then actually end up steering you more towards being like that. So just to give one of the more scientific case studies, I read a lot of books where they have scientific studies about things, and that one of them, so they've done some studies around stereotype threat with women as well, and obviously with women the stereotypes around maths or around spatial awareness. But the one that they did with men was around social sensitivity. So where how easy it is to pick up on non-verbal cues. So reading people and reading that non-verbal behaviour and such like. So that's usually in society stereotypically seen as a feminine trait, that women can easily read people. So when they put men into this situation, so they told one group of men that they were being assessed for social sensitivity, and actually it produced better results for women than with men. And then the other group were told just that it was assessing information processing, and that's it. So the men who were told that women performed better in what they were actually looking for performed worse. And the reasons that they performed worse were that they were so busy deliberating about it because they were conscious that they might not be able to do it. That's what actually hindered the results. So they weren't doing it as intuitively as they normally would be. So with social sensitivity, we are all humans. So we do it as a natural ability, or most of us can do it as a natural ability, not all of us. So biologically it's not gendered, but due to the stereotype, it can be, and we know that stereotype threat can impact mental capacity. So just the fact that it's weighing on our mind. So I think it's a really interesting one, because if we're looking at an example with men, so for example being the inept dad. So because you might be so conscious about the fact that there's a stereotype around men being disorganized, chaotic, not being able to live up to the mother because, you know, they're so all over the place and naturally like that, I wonder how much that actually impacts a man's confidence in being a dad, and whether they can actually fulfill their potential of just doing what they would do naturally without having that weighing on their mind or being conscious of it. So that's like an example that perhaps it could affect in my mind, but I don't know whether you've had any experience of stereotype threat, or how it's impacted anything, or even with your own children.
Yeah, thanks for explaining it. It's quite a complex concept. I've seen some studies as well. That idea about being a dad and being inept, maybe that's one, as a pretty hands-on dad. I don't do everything, maybe do 50-50 since the kids were small. You go to a lot of, parent events, and often you're in a minority of dads there. Often it's mainly mums, and it's like, oh wow, like, hey, there's this, like, why isn't your wife here? And then it's like, oh, it's well done, you managed to change a nappy on your own, well done. And you do these things because you do them every day, but it's just like, I don't know, you probably then make a mistake or something because everyone's watching you, and you kind of think, oh, I'm not supposed to be good at this. I can definitely understand that. or that men are supposed to be, good at really good things, like, I don't know, I don't want to generalize, and really maps parking cars, things that I'm terrible at. I'm not very good. Like when I go to the garage and the mechanic's talking about what they've done to the car, like I got no idea. I'm like, that's why I paid you to do it. But yeah, you just kind of feel like, oh, I must feel like an idiot. Like, as a man, I should be able to do this. Or even like over lockdown, the washing machine broke, and I went on, espares.com and figured out how to change the brushes in my washing machine. I was so pleased. I was like, wow. My dad was like, oh, what a man. And I don't know, you felt like you finally have made him proud after 40 years because I could fix the washing machine. Yeah, I can see that. I see that coming in, and especially in certain environments, like predominantly male environments, you'd have that. I'd be thinking like, because I've had that before with a group of guys where I've said something which might have come across as too sensitive, and then like, then all the kind of jokes come out, and so you're trying to kind of not be as sensitive as you usually are. And I think men do this definitely at school. Also, this idea of being intellectual or clever, you'd basically dumb yourself down. You didn't want to come across as too clever or too hard, like you were trying, so you just waste a lot of energy when you could just be yourself and forget what everyone else thinks.
How do we create that space for men to be able to do that? Because, for example, women have these lean-in circles, or they have more acceptance, I suppose, in society to be able to really share their deepest, darkest thoughts, feelings, anxieties, whatever it might be, where they don't think men have the same opportunity to be able to do that for fear that they're too sensitive, whatever it might be.
Yeah, there's some great groups kind of coming up. So there's a group called Men Up North, which a friend of mine, Angus, set up in Sheffield. And, he set this up because, 2 of his male friends committed suicide. And he just thought, men have got to be able to talk about this. And so he's been running sessions in Sheffield and around kind of, the north of the UK, getting groups of men together of, of all ages, of all backgrounds, and just kind of having a space to talk. I've done some work with him and his colleague, from Dads in Business. I managed to run a workshop at Amazon, which was kind of broadcast worldwide, and we're now working with them, to do some workshops with men to kind of get those groups together. There are others kind of lean-in circles where you get groups of women together, and I've been involved in those in the past. So I think and there's different ways that kind of men bond and communicate, maybe around an activity, or this idea of kind of shoulder to shoulder. Men might be kind of side by side working on something, and then in the middle of the way of what they're doing, fishing or playing pool or whatever, they'll talk about what's really at the heart of the matter. And then, the resources, Men Up North, great place. Anga, who runs that, is a really great guy. I'd recommend him to probably maybe get him on one of your future shows. He'd be a good person to talk. But yeah, I've been trying to do that at Amazon. I think it's hard. I've set up like this kind of working fathers group. But people don't really want to talk about things. We have the women's networks, and there's a lot of chat and a lot of discussion. I've set up the families group at Amazon worldwide as well. But among dads, the most popular thread is the daily dad joke. And then it's a bit sad, really. It's kind of like a clown, like you're trying to make everything into a joke without really talking about what's upsetting you, and what could be making you feel depression. So I think that's definitely an area that needs more support.
So you're clearly very passionate about diversity and inclusion, and you're a big advocate for making that positive change. Do you ever get any backlash for being outspoken and sharing your views and experiences about it?
I do, yeah. Actually, more from women than from men. So obviously, when you, I wanted to read Hannah's thing. I'll read that in a second. But like when you get involved in women's networks or sponsoring. Now I manage quite a diverse team, men and women around the world from different backgrounds. And when you're mentoring maybe younger women in the organization, you'll get women making comments. Are you hitting on her? Like, what's going on? Or if you're going to a women's network event, Brian's got his pinny on today. So I think there's this. I think both men and women feel threatened by it. Like it's kind of upsetting the status quo sometime, and men might not be comfortable with that, but a lot of women aren't comfortable with that either. Not all women are feminists. So it's definitely not something. Like, it's really funny. I was in Seattle at one of our inclusion events, and one of Amazon's directors, a woman, said to me, "Oh, you must get sacked all the time." And I was like, I don't, and it makes people really awkward that this man's kind of getting involved in diversity. But I think it's really important. So you kind of keep going.
Definitely
Yeah.
important.
Okay, and also as well, I called out a director at one of the companies I was at, because he made this pretty sexist joke on the stage at one of our big events, and I called it out. And a woman said, "You nearly lost him his job," and I was like, "No, he nearly lost himself a job, and I'm not going to tolerate that." Those kind of comments that he's making. And but he's French. It's like, well, that doesn't excuse it either. Like, he's talking to an international audience. So yeah, I think, it's not really. You're not going to get a load of thanks for being in this space, but I think it's really important.
A great question that Hannah's just popped in is just talking about how men don't seem to be able to be their authentic selves socially a lot of the time. I don't know whether at this point as well, so if we can hear from your experience of this, Brian, but then I don't know whether it might be good to throw this open to everybody else as well and see what people feel about that, because I think that's a really big issue if that's the case, that a lot of the time you're having to put on a front, and I can't imagine the internal pressure of letting those emotions or feelings build up. I mean, surely that's just like an eruption waiting to happen one day.
Yeah, and it is, and I think Hannah makes a great point there, that men do behave differently in different situations. When with my wife, or with even with women friends, you can kind of be yourself, and you can let your guard down and just be open and talk about what's going on for you and what you're worried about. Whereas with a group of men, especially it's much more kind of banter, like jokes and like riffing off each other's jokes, and you never really, and it's much harder. You got to you don't want to say the wrong thing. So yeah, I can definitely see that. Maybe someone from the Hannah or someone else would like to kind of give their experience from a women's perspective.
Yeah, would anybody like to chip in on that one, or anything really? I suppose we've covered quite a lot already, so if anybody has any burning questions, or if there's anything that's been brought up so far that you'd like to know more about or share your experience of, would love to hear from you.
I think you make a really interesting point with the younger generation that you've put into the chat. About they're much more receptive or open to having these conversations compared to the older folkies in society, that we're all quite shocked still about some of the stuff that goes on.
Yeah, I think I see a real disconnect when I see different generations in organisations about how the younger people are more open about certain language, just about talking about their feelings, but then are often reflected on as snowflakes or too emotional. And I think we need to be careful that as we're opening up the conversations, that we then don't stifle that openness that they're bringing through.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's
definitely.
It's a really difficult one, isn't it, when we refer to them as snowflakes and being weak, or they haven't got that resilience or toughness of all the generations before. Well, actually, they are being open and they're challenging those traditional views that everybody has done before them, and it's just because it conflicts with their views that they're not being accepted. And I think that's really sad.
Yeah, it's a great point. I was speaking at a Flexpo, a flexible working conference, and a woman was complaining about the young generation, like, oh, they want this, they want that, they want flexibility, they want to be able to do lots of things. We've we've had to work our way to the top. Why don't they? But to be honest, we've got a lot to learn from the younger generation in terms of passive income, portfolio careers, wanting to do different things. We're not going to work for the same company for 40, 50 years, maybe like our grandparents might have done. I think there's a lot to learn from the young generation. I think it's really optimistic. So that's a great point, Di, about younger generations.
And I just, I know I apologised in the chat, but yeah, the way that I kind of said positive discrimination might have come across as like, oh God, she's rude. But yeah, it was just relating back to my criminology degree from last year, and we did this whole thing around, within the police and how, they actively look for different, minority groups to kind of fill their kind of quotas to make them look better, for kind of visual representation in terms of oh, we're doing the right thing. But yeah, just a different point in terms of, I think it's dangerous to label any kind of group, and I think for me it's all about the individual. So we're talking about males, we're talking about females, we're talking about ethnic minorities or people with disabilities, or every single person has intersecting issues, and we can't understand every single thing that kind of people within those kind of subgroups think. So for me, it's just about, you know, having a little bit of respect for the person as the individual, and trying to help as many people as possible to be included, but not to kind of necessarily think in terms of, like, you know, breaking society up into little segments, because it sometimes doesn't help.
I think those silos that we create can often create a them and us divide, and it has to be really careful how we manage that. And I think, Sophie, I totally agree. You hit the nail on the head for us, that you can't compare like for like when it comes to people, because we've all got this unique recipe that makes us who we are. And no two of us in this call today are identical in our makeup or our experiences and challenges. So
that's what makes it exciting.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think you're right, Sophie. It does create this idea of opposites, like, you know, are you male or female? Are you black or white? And it's, you know, life isn't like that. People aren't like that. But it almost creates this conflict. Whereas if you can be just inclusive and accept everyone as they are, and you can just show up as you are, you know, I've got a lot of, you know, feminine energy and as well as masculine energy. Just be, if everyone could just be themselves, we'd save a lot of time. But people do feel the need to kind of fit into a certain identity, or they're put into that grouping.
Yeah, because it's the whole kind of binary, like you say, you know, black, white, male, female. And that's fine if you fit into the girly category and you are a girl and you're a female, and you buy into all the social norms and the institutional kind of, you know, but it's those people in the middle who are maybe fluid or kind of don't feel like this. That's where the problems kind of lie. So yeah. Sorry, I could talk about this all day, but I'll shut up now.
Just trying to, you can see all of us glance down when the chat box ignites with something. I know that Rob's made a comment about how social class can have an impact and do support it. So male bravado issue is made very visible in working class environments, even when the situation is brought to light in popular culture, such as Billy Elliot.
Yeah, I think social class, definitely. I've kind of lost my accents. I've been in Luxembourg for too long now, and someone complained about lack of regional accents on panels. So I was born in Newcastle, had a Geordie accent till I was 6, then grew up in Birmingham, had a Brummie accent till I was about 18, and, you know, it was teased out of me when I got to university in Northumbria. But yeah, I know the families, my dad's family is kind of working class, where, you know, and it's quite violent. The family I grew up in was quite violent in terms of how you're controlled as a child, which is maybe more in a working class environment. The kind of work, the kind of drinking culture. Someone made a point about drugs culture. I'm not familiar with that, but it's a tough environment to be working in, and, you know, it's more gender segregated, I would say, between men and women in terms of the roles. You know, it's still in all roles, but I'd love to hear your perspectives, and maybe Rob's got some points to make on that.
I think there's an interesting part whenever it comes to job applications for me with social class, because often even things like red brick universities versus polys, or things like extracurricular activities. So if you see that a candidate is really interested in polo or chess versus someone that's got a keen interest, I don't know, for the cinema, our bias comes into play automatically, and we make assumptions about individuals and we start creating our own stories. So I definitely think that hinders, I suppose, the opportunities for individuals, and bias really is a massive factor that we all have a responsibility to start overcoming and managing, ways that we can try and break down our own unconscious bias, with social class being just one of the ways that it could be impacted.
I think that's a class point, because we were talking before about binary and, you know, not fitting into, you know, this box or that box, but I think that's really hard to get out of that mentality, because that's how we've grown up to think. And I know that, yeah, for the younger generations, they might be, you know, much more open about it. But for me, it's definitely a challenge for me to, you know, most days there's something that comes up where I have to, you know, think, oh no, that's not right, push no, and challenge myself about it, because it's just it's in there already. It's my biases that, you know, I think depending on where we're from, obviously, and how we've grown up, I think those are pretty set in, and something that we do have to be really conscious of a lot of the time, especially when it comes to binary things like that, or with stereotypes as well.
Yeah, awesome.
And I think, just picking up on what Sophie said about what's happening in the policing around their their positive action approach to recruitment is to try and to overcome some of that bias and to give people a good understanding of coming into a career that is different to something that they may have done already. So that there aren't many people from ethnic backgrounds that go into policing because it's never been seen as a career of choice. So the approach with positive action is to give them the information, the family support, and all of those areas of understanding that help them to then go through the process. And it's the same when you're trying to change any societal kind of stereotypes in terms of roles, or whether that be social, gender, or whatever, to try and help those that aren't in that organisation or that aren't part of that demographic, how to get them to feel confident and comfortable to go in there, so that they're fully supported in terms of that as well. So the positive action legislation supports those kind of initiatives in terms of trying to get the balance in organisations and for it to be done for the right reasons as well.
And I think it's so important that the likes of our police service or any of our business and services that we provide, we need to be reflective of those that either that we're serving or those that are buying our products. You can't have a carbon copy team that are able to be creative enough or innovative enough, or be on the same page. And I think that things like the Positive Action campaign, I know you've done some fantastic work with the police service to help them with that. It's definitely important and definitely needed. If you can't be what you can't see, but let's help people get there through that education piece.
And some of it is that the people that were coming through knew somebody that was in that industry, or they knew somebody that was in the police, so they had a huge amount of information going through that other people don't have. And that's what we see kind of through our school system. Somebody mentioned earlier about girls not going through the computer kind of elements of it. So until we can help to plug those gaps that processes in our society have missed out on, that's the only way we're going to start to sort of create that fairer, equitable environment for people.
Speaking of the police, I had an interesting, it's about 10 years ago now, and it's good to hear about all the improvements that they've made. I was on the tube in London, and there was this guy going around, I think he was off his head, he was trying to bite some of the women on the tube carriage, and he was walking down and he was just acting really weirdly. So he got to a woman near me, and I just put my hand on his chest and said, leave her alone. He went mad and got his hand around me. He's got, I'm going to kill you and everything else. And I kind of turned to the carriage, and all these people were just looking at me behind the newspapers, in a different environment. In London, they might not have helped you out. If it'd been on the metro in Newcastle, maybe someone would have helped me out. But and I then had to go to the, I was then, there's some plainclothes police officers on the tube, and they got this guy off at King's Cross Station. I was then kind of seen as, a suspect. They said, okay, we've asked people on the tube, it seems like you didn't provoke him, you didn't do anything wrong. I was like, I was just standing up for that woman, no one else helped me out, and I was in a headlock. And I had to go to King's Cross police station, and they said, okay, we need to do a witness statement now. And this was 10 years ago, and I'm sure it's all changed now. But they pulled up the statement, and on the statement, it had already been written, the attacker was a 40-year-old man, black. And I was like, oh, I didn't say that. And so we just have a template, because it usually is. So it's amazing, these biases, and I'm sure that they've moved on from that. But it's these kind of systematic things like what do you have on the template, and even the two policemen. It was a bit like, I don't know if you've seen Early Doors. It was a bit like that. Like even the cursor on their computer was a woman in a bikini. I don't know. So there's all these little things. I'm sure they've done a lot of work on it since then.
Yeah, they have, and there's still more to do. And I think there are, the police are no different to any other organisation, that there is always work to do, because society continues to evolve and continues to change, and organisations don't always keep up with that change. And what was once acceptable, if you've got maybe an older generation, I know I'm really sort of putting things into blocks there, but you've got an older generation, it might have been okay to have your cursor as a woman in a bikini, back in the early days of more the calendar on the back of the locker door, but it's just not acceptable now. And it's how we keep people's knowledge moving along in terms of that, to keep them confident and comfortable with those changes in society and that knowledge input that they're getting.
Yeah, awesome. I think I'm just conscious of the timing that we've got now, folks. I think, Brian, I'd like to ask you one final question, I suppose, more so because you're such an advocate and an ally for females, and given that 50/50 specialises in gender balance, just one final question of your your opinion of how men can be better advocates and allies for women, or what's one thing that we can take away from today as a top tip, I suppose.
I guess the one thing, I'm going to have to read Hannah's post in a minute, but I think it's paying attention. You know, I think basically there's a lot around education yourself, and there's interventions like like I did with, you know, putting my hand on the guy's chest on the tube. But I think a lot of it's paying attention. Like when you're in meetings, when you're in working environments, when you're in social situations, you know, when you're in recruiting decisions, promotions, who's getting the projects, I think pay attention. And just, you know, just like I did, I was there, I'd been attacked, I was giving a statement to the police, and I was still paying attention to some of the little cues and think, oh, that's interesting, they've got that. So yeah, I mean, you don't necessarily have to intervene as a starting point. Just, you know, pay attention. What's the makeup of your meetings? What's the makeup of your management? Who's speaking more? Does anyone get interrupted? Who do ideas get attributed to? Who gets the best projects? Who's getting more of the time with the managers? Who gets all the mentoring opportunities or the new things? Just pay attention to it. You know, hopefully in your organizations, you'll find a balance. If you do, let me know, because it'd be great to go and work for them. You'll find in some of the companies I've worked for, there's definitely a lot of work to do. So I think, you know, pay attention. This is, you know, things that you notice. Maybe at some point you want to intervene or, you know, challenge people on some of the things that are happening. So that's my tip.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. You'll be able to find Brian online on LinkedIn very actively. He's also one of the founding members of Men for Inclusion, which is a group on LinkedIn that I'd suggest that you go and actively seek out too. In terms of contact details, I'm sure, Brian, you wouldn't mind people getting in touch with you. I haven't purposely shared your email address without your permission, but just on the screen you'll be able to see Lindsay and I's email address and contact details. And thank you so much, and happy International Men's Day to everybody. Lindsay and I'll hang around in case anybody does want to have a further chat, but we really appreciate you taking the time to join us.
Thanks so much. And you know, just on Hannah's point, when I talk about, you know, men's mental health, I'm trying not to dismiss women's mental health, and also there's a lot on both sides of it. I think today's a day to think about men, so let's think about that. But yeah, definitely we have to work together. So I really appreciate everyone being part of this today. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk to everyone. Great comments, great discussion. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Brian. Cheers, folks.